I was 15 and had just moved to a new town right in the middle of the school year. I met some kids that seemed cool and took them up on their offer to hang out and spend the night at one of their houses. The evening started off great. The host mom made pizza for everyone. They had a pool table and even a PlayStation. I was having a lot of fun when they all decided to head up to Mike's and try to buy some weed. I had not been around drugs at all, but was feeling rebellious and nervously went along. It turned out that Mike lived in a questionable trailer about 15 miles out of town in the woods, with somewhat of an entourage of seedy figures. He was a formidable character, lanky, wide-eyed, and rail-thin, with a nervous way about him that instantly put me on edge. I'm a big guy, and he instantly started sizing me up, grabbing my shoulder several times and squeezing my arms. He said I looked like a fighter and asked me if I wanted to fight him. I declined, but he kept telling everyone I was going to fight him. I'm sure I was visibly nervous, but my friends just laughed it off and asked if they could buy some weed. He insisted that we have a drink first. I had also never drank, but I did my best to choke down the warm beer that was shoved unceremoniously into my hand. I took in my surroundings as we drank. There were tin foil and glass pipes on every flat surface, at least 3 guns, and the rest of the adults looked like they were well ahead of us in the consumption department. My friend insisted on getting the weed, but Mike kept telling him not to be in a hurry. He brought out a bong, lit it, and started passing it around. This was the first time I smoked weed. He haggled me over how I wasn't inhaling enough, and then laughed like a hyena when I had a coughing fit. He kept making comments on how I was big and acted tough, but I was really just a big wuss. He also made comments akin to taking me in the back room and making a man out of me. One of the tooth-impaired women began some long monologue about a man's G-spot being located rectally. I wanted to leave immediately. I took the first opportunity to tell my friend that I thought it was best we leave, and now. He finally convinced Mike to retrieve the weed for purchase, and an exchange was made. I tried to walk out, but Mike slammed the door when I opened it. He started insisting that I was a narc, and that I needed to strip naked so he could check me for a wire. This went for a few minutes as I just stood there uncomfortably, hoping he would end this little joke and let us go. Finally, he said he'd known I wasn't a narc because I was going to smoke meth to prove it. I looked at my friend and just shook my head, but he was either too stoned, too apathetic, or just thought Mike was being funny. Either way, there was no help there. Mike disappeared to the back room while the 3 men that had been sitting on the couch got up and pushed the couch in front of the door, laughing and telling us to sit down and get comfortable. I had a hallway behind me and walked down it, looking for a way out. There was a small laundry room at the end. And to my relief, a door. It was only to my relief until I seen that not only did it not have a handle, but it was nailed shut. Mike began yelling for me to come back to the living room. My brain was in a tailspin. Fight or flight, fight or flight. Do something. Move. I kicked the door. It opened. There were no stairs, so I jumped down to the snowy ground and began to run. I ran into the woods, grateful that I had not removed my coat in the warm house. I heard a commotion behind me as Mike screamed obscenities at me. I kept moving. Then I heard several gunshots. My heart was beating out of my chest. I had a general idea where the road was and headed in that direction, avoiding the meandering lane that led to Mike's trailer. I slipped on the hillside several times, but luckily there was enough moonlight to navigate through the trees. I heard a loud truck start up and then more yelling. I was leaving a trail, but I couldn't avoid it. Eventually, I reached the frozen dirt road and started walking back towards the highway, staying in the trees. I saw headlights coming and hid, hoping that it was my friend. It wasn't. Neither was the next one. I continued walking. It's worth noting that this is years before I had a cell phone. After about 4 miles, the road met the highway back to the town. It was harder to avoid walking on the road at this point. It was clear for quite a ways on either side. But when a car came driving by, I ducked down in the snow on the shoulder, trying to get my head just high enough to see, hoping it was a police cruiser. I did this several times, my jeans soaked, me shivering with cold and fear. It was about the 4th time or so I did this that I noticed that the car was driving much slower than the 65 miles per hour speed limit. Was this Mike, coming to kill the suspected narc? I stayed low and prepared to run. As it got closer, I recognized my friend's minivan. I stood up and waved and hoped for the best. My friends had told me that the scene inside the house had turned into absolute chaos after I kicked the door open. Mike had gone ballistic, screaming that I was a narc and that he was going to kill me. He had picked up the gun and pointed it at my friends, telling them he was going to kill them for bringing a narc to his house. They insisted I wasn't, and that he had just scared me. He then stomped down the hallway and fired a gun several times out the door I had kicked open. My friends took advantage of the moment to pull the couch out of the way and run out the front door, jumping in the minivan and tearing off down the lane. After turning onto the road, they seen headlights behind them and intentionally killed their lights and turned down someone else's lane. They waited a while and then went out looking for me, driving up and down the dirt road and the highway, absolutely freaking out and not knowing what to do. They apologized profusely and insisted that nothing like that had ever happened before. We were all pretty relieved to be back together. Not long after this, Mike and several others were arrested in a drug sting. I was worried that he thought I had something to do with this and hoped he wouldn't be holding a grudge and want to come looking for me. A lingering fear that eventually subsided. Until one day, a couple years later, I was working at the local grocery store, and here came Mike, looking a little worse for wear. He looked right at me, and my heart stopped. "You're a big kid," he said. "You play football?"